Nancy Drew Mystery Stories, number 32, The Scarlet Slipper Mystery by Carolyn Keene. Copyright 1954, Grosset and Dunlap. Chapter 1, A Frightening Message. "We will crash! Oh! Oh!" An ashen-faced, middle-aged man leaned across the aisle of the four-engine transport plane toward Nancy Drew. The attractive blonde girl smiled reassuringly. "Please don't worry," she said gently. "Only one motor has stopped. We'll be all right, and we'll soon reach River Heights." "No, no," the man moaned. "This is the end, and all my work." He mumbled something to himself in a foreign tongue, then added, "My beloved Centrovia." He shook a fist as if at the pilot, then buried his face in his hands. As Nancy tried to comfort him further, a stewardess and a man and a woman passenger crowded alongside, blocking her view. The foreign gentleman quieted down, the passengers returned to their seats, and Nancy became engrossed with the preparation for landing. Would it be as safe as she had predicted? She wondered. The pilot maneuvered his ship expertly, bringing it down in a long glide and landing on the far end of the runway at the River Heights airport. As the plane rolled to a stop, Nancy smiled at the stranger across the aisle and said, "That wasn't bad, was it?" "A miracle," was the abrupt answer. The man stood up, grabbed a briefcase from the overhead rack, and made a quick departure. Nancy put on the jacket of her navy linen suit, picked up her straw purse, and walked slowly to the door. She paused to tell the stewardess how much she had enjoyed the flight, then hurried down the ramp. A short distance beyond stood her two closest friends, Bess Marvin and George Fane, in gay cotton skirts and blouses. George was a girl of the tomboy type. Her dark hair was cut in a sleek bob, and she had a slender figure, much like Nancy's. George's pretty cousin, Bess, on the other hand, was plump and worried continuously about her figure. "Hi, Nancy," George exclaimed. "Have a good time at your Aunt Eloise's?" "Perfect. I love New York." "See any shows?" Bess asked. Nancy nodded. 3. One was a musical with wonderful dancing. You'd adore it, Bess. As soon as Nancy had collected her baggage, the 3 girls walked to Nancy's convertible, which her friends had brought to the airport. Nancy took the wheel, and as they drove toward the residential section of town, she said, "Tell me everything that's happened while I was gone." Bess giggled. "I've lost 2 pounds. There's a wonderful new dancing school in town, Nancy. All kinds of classes. I've joined one in reducing." George sniffed. "Yes, Bess takes it off dancing and puts it all back on by eating." Nancy laughed and asked, "Who's running the new dancing school?" Bess said that it was owned by a brother and sister named Hélène and Henri Fontaine, who had recently come to River Heights from France, and that they were exceptionally fine dancers, as well as excellent teachers. "They have a simply delightful accent," Bess said. "Wait till you hear them talk." George remarked that the classes had an interesting feature. Before each lesson, Hélène and Henri gave a talk on the history of the dance. "How interesting," said Nancy, her blue eyes sparkling. She was always intrigued by the background of art in any form. A few minutes later, they reached the Fane residence, and George climbed out. She waved goodbye, saying, "See you soon. I want to hear all about your trip, Nancy." As the car pulled away from the curb, Bess suddenly cried out, "Oh, I've lost my purse! In the excitement of meeting you, I must have left it at the dancing school." "We'll go there and pick it up," Nancy offered. The school occupied the second floor of an office building in the business section of River Heights. Nancy parked and waited while her friend hurried upstairs. Bess was back in a few seconds, however, without her purse. "Oh, your pocketbook wasn't there after all," Nancy commented. "It's not that. I didn't even look for it. Nancy, something dreadful must have happened to Hélène. She and Henri are up there all alone, and Hélène is crying as if her heart would break. Please come up with me and see if we can help her." Nancy hesitated a moment. She remarked that perhaps the matter was a family affair and they should not intrude. But Bess felt sure there was more to it than that. "I heard Hélène say, 'Oh, Henri, I'm so frightened.'" Nancy needed no further urging. She got out of the car instantly and hurried up the stairs with Bess. As the two girls entered the studio, Hélène, a dainty, dark-haired girl, was saying to her brother in French, "Now we must flee again." Nancy and Bess stood still as the startled couple looked up. Henri was a tall, handsome young man with blonde hair. He was leaning on an ivory and gold French provincial desk, behind which his sister was seated. At a glance, Nancy saw that the room was spacious and beautifully furnished with gold chairs and deep blue drapes. On the wall above the desk hung a pair of scarlet ballet slippers. "Oh, Bess, come in," Helen invited, drying her eyes with a dainty handkerchief. Bess moved forward slowly. She introduced Nancy, then added, "If you are in some kind of trouble, perhaps we can assist you. I couldn't help overhearing you when I came back for my handbag a few minutes ago." The brother and sister exchanged quick glances. Then slowly, Henri shook his head. "I'm afraid this is too serious a problem." "We don't mean to intrude, of course," said Bess. "But you see, Nancy is a detective and has solved many difficult mysteries." The Fontaines looked at Nancy in amazement. Then Henri said, "A girl detective? You are very pretty and hardly look like a detective." Nancy laughed merrily. "I'm afraid Bess is giving me too much credit, but I'll be glad to do anything I can for you." Again, Henri and Hélène exchanged glances. When the girl nodded to her brother, Henri said, "We do need a friend. Perhaps you girls are the ones to help us." Henri took an unsigned note from his pocket and showed it to Nancy. It was hand-printed in French, and at the bottom, crudely drawn in red, was a pair of ballet slippers, similar to those hanging on the wall. "The note was folded and left on the desk by some unknown person," he explained. "It was not addressed to Hélène and me, but the scarlet slippers insignia convinced us that the note was for us, no one else. Here, I will translate it for you." Although Nancy could both read and speak French, she listened attentively as he translated. "You will lose your lives if you do not leave this area at once. Do not communicate with any friends you have made in the United States." As Henri finished reading, Hélène burst into tears. "I'm so afraid," she said. "This is the second note like this that we have received." "Recently?" Nancy asked. "No," Henri replied, and went on to explain that they had received the first note in France about 18 months before. That one had ordered the brother and sister to flee from France. "Is that when you came to this country?" Nancy said. "Yes, it was," Helen answered. Then, looking around furtively and lowering her voice, she added, "The other note also contained a threat. It said that the secret police in our native country were going to kidnap us and take us back there. I'm afraid that's what this one means." "Isn't France your native country?" Bess broke in. "No," Henri replied. "We are Centrovians." "Centrovians!" Nancy exclaimed. "I wonder." As she stopped speaking, Hélène asked if they had said anything to offend Nancy. The young detective said no indeed. She was just startled because a short time before, She had been talking with a man on a plane from New York who was a Centrovian. "Oh!" the brother and sister cried out, and Henri added, "He was probably the one who left this note. What did he look like?" Nancy described the man, adding that he was apparently a very nervous, excitable individual. The Fontaines failed to recognize him, but were convinced that he was the guilty person. "If this man is staying in River Heights, I ought to be able to find him," Nancy said. The Fontaines begged her to do so. The girls arose to leave, and Henri walked to the door with them. "I have one very special request to make," he said. "We have never told anyone here that we came from Centrovia. France was our adopted country, and we want it to be known that we came from there." "I understand," said Nancy, "but perhaps you should tell more about what happened and why you left Centrovia. I promise to keep everything confidential." Henri related a terrifying tale of how Centrovia had been overrun by enemy forces. Due to the horrors of the occupation, many people had fled to other countries. "This happened about 8 years ago," the young man explained. "Our parents were among those who found refuge in France. Our name was Provac. When we reached Paris, we changed it to Fontaine." Hélène took up the story. "My parents, perhaps I should not tell you this, joined an organization which aimed to overthrow those new rulers in Centrovia. But both of them died before anything was accomplished." Hélène pointed to the slippers on the wall. "Those belonged to my mother. She was a famous ballet dancer." Henri put an arm about his sister's shoulders. "Our mother's death was caused by worry," he said. "At the time we fled Centrovia, another family asked us to take a fortune in jewels with us to be used in helping the underground movement. Unfortunately, the new rulers suspected this, and thus caused my parents a great deal of worry by accusing them of stealing the fortune, and tried to make them reveal where it was." "But they didn't steal it! They didn't!" Hélène cried out. "The jewels were sold a few at a time to provide money for the work of freeing our people." As the Fontaines stopped speaking, Nancy asked if there was any connection between the slippers on the note and those on the wall. "I don't know," Helen answered. "Oh, what do you think we should do? Obey the warning and give up our work here?" It was several seconds before Nancy replied. Then she said, "Please don't make any hasty decisions. I'm sure I can help you. Furthermore, my father is a lawyer, and I'll talk to him." The Fontaines agreed to delay leaving. "Surely whoever sent the warning note would not expect you to wind up your business affairs on a moment's notice," Nancy added. "In the meantime, I may find a way out for you." "Oh, thank you," said Helen. "You are a true friend, and just to think, we have known you only a few minutes. May I call you Nancy?" The young detective smiled at Hélène's charming old-world manners and said that from now on they would be Hélène and Nancy to each other. "And will you please call me Henri?" her brother asked, a twinkle in his eyes. "Please, Nancy." Nancy blushed a little and said, "All right, Henri." Bess retrieved her pocketbook, and a short time later the girls said goodbye to the Fontaines. Nancy promised to get in touch with them the next day. As they drove along the main street, Bess asked about the stranger in the plane who was from Centrovia. The words were hardly out of her mouth when, at an intersection, a man suddenly stepped from the curb directly into the path of the car. Nancy slammed on her brakes so fast that the tires screeched. As the man stepped back to the sidewalk, she cried, "Bess, take the wheel! That's the Centrovian I met on the plane! I must talk to him!" Before Bess could object, Nancy was out of the car and hurrying toward the suspect. End of Chapter 1.